pushed a chair out of the way and ran outdoors. The grass was wet, and the earth smelled of springtime. Fern's sneakers were sopping by the time she caught up with her father. "Please don't kill it! It's unfair!" Mr. Arable stopped walking. "Fern, you will have to learn to control yourself." "Control myself? This is a matter of life and death, and you talk about controlling myself." Tears ran down her cheeks as she took hold of the axe and tried to pull it out of her father's hand. "Fern, I know more about raising a litter of pigs than you do. A weakling makes trouble. Now run along." "But it's unfair. The pig couldn't help being born small. If I had been small at birth, would you have killed me?" A queer look came over John Arable's face. He seemed almost ready to cry himself. "All right," he said. "You go back to the house, and I will bring the runt when I come in. I'll let you start it on a bottle, like a baby. Then you'll see what trouble a pig can be." For the first few days of his life, Wilbur was allowed to live in a box near the stove in the kitchen. When he was 5 weeks old, Wilbur went to live in a manure pile in the cellar of Zuckerman's barn. One afternoon in June, when Wilbur was almost 2 months old, Fern had not arrived for her usual visit. Wilbur stood in the sun, feeling lonely and bored. "There's never anything to do around here," he thought. Out of the darkness came a small voice he had never heard before. "Do you want a friend, Wilbur? I'll be a friend to you. I've watched you all day. I like you." Stretched across the upper part of the doorway was a big spider web, and hanging from the top of the web was a large gray spider about the size of a gumdrop. She had 8 legs, and she was waving one of them at Wilbur in friendly greeting. "My name is Charlotte." "I think you're beautiful," said Wilbur. "Well, I am pretty," replied Charlotte. "There's no denying that. Almost all spiders are rather nice looking. I'm not as flashy as some, but I'll do." One afternoon, the oldest sheep walked into the barn. "Hello," she said. "Seems to me you're putting on weight." "Yes, I guess I am," replied Wilbur. "At my age, it's a good idea to keep gaining." "You know why they're fattening you up, don't you? They're going to kill you. Turn you into smoked bacon and ham." Arable arrives with his .22, shoots the— "Stop!" screamed Wilbur. "I don't want to die. Somebody save me." "Be quiet, Wilbur," said Charlotte, who had been listening to this awful conversation. "I can't keep quiet. I don't want to die." "You shall not die," said Charlotte briskly. "What? Really? Who's going to save me?" "I am," said Charlotte. "But I want you to quiet down immediately. You're carrying on in a childish way. Stop your crying. I can't stand hysterics." On foggy mornings, Charlotte's web was truly a thing of beauty. This morning, each thin strand was decorated with dozens of tiny beads of water. The web glistened in the light and made a pattern of loveliness and mystery, like a delicate veil. Even Lurvy, the hired man, who wasn't particularly interested in beauty, noticed the web when he came with the pig's breakfast. There, in the center of the web, neatly woven in block letters, was a message that said, "Some pig." Lurvy felt weak. "I must be seeing things," he whispered. He dropped to his knees and uttered a short prayer. Then he walked back to the house and called Mr. Zuckerman. Wilbur was pleased to receive so much attention. Lurvy and Mr. and Mrs. Zuckerman stood for about an hour, reading the words on the web over and watching Wilbur. Charlotte was delighted with the way that her trick was working. The news had spread all over the county. Everybody knew that the Zuckermans had a wondrous pig. People came from miles around to look at Wilbur and to read the words on Charlotte's web. Some pig. Terrific. Radiant. Some of Wilbur's friends in the barn worried that all this attention would go to his head and make him stuck up. But it never did. Wilbur still worried about the future, as he could hardly believe that a mere spider was able to save his life. He would dream that men were coming to get him with knives and guns, but that was only a dream. In the daytime, Wilbur was happy and confident. No pig ever had truer friends, and he realized that friendship is one of the most satisfying things in the world. He knew it was time for the county fair, and if he could distinguish himself at the county fair and maybe win some prize money, he was sure Zuckerman would let him live. On the morning of fair day, everybody got up at daylight. Lurvy put clean straw in Wilbur's crate and lifted it into the pig pen. The crate was green, and in gold letters it said, "Zuckerman's famous pig." Charlotte climbed onto the side of the crate and hid herself in a knothole in the top board. Mr. Zuckerman and Mr. Arable and Lurvy jammed Wilbur into the crate, and away went everybody to the fair. When they pulled into the fairgrounds, they could hear music and see the Ferris wheel turning in the sky. They could smell the dust of the racetrack where the sprinkling cart had moistened it, and they could smell hamburgers frying and balloons aloft. All morning, people wandered past Wilbur's pen. Dozens and dozens of strangers stopped to stare at him and to admire his silky white coat, his curly tail, and his kind and radiant expression. In the cool of the evening, when the shadows darkened the fairgrounds, Charlotte had finished her web. The word humble was woven neatly in the center. Next morning, when the first light came into the sky, Wilbur awoke and looked for Charlotte. He saw her up overhead in a corner. She was very quiet. Next to her, attached to the ceiling, Wilbur saw a curious object. It was a sort of sack or cocoon. It was peach-colored and looked as though it were made of cotton candy. "Are you awake, Charlotte?" he said softly. "Yes," was the answer. "What is that nifty little thing in the corner? Did you make that?" "I did," replied Charlotte in a weak voice. "It is my egg sack." "What's inside it? Eggs?" 514 of them. "It's a perfectly beautiful egg sack," said Wilbur. "Yes, it is pretty," replied Charlotte. "I can guarantee that it is strong. It is made out of the toughest material I have. It is also waterproof." Wilbur noticed that Charlotte's voice sounded sad. "Oh, don't pay any attention to me," said Charlotte. "I guess I feel sad because I won't ever get to see my children." "What? Of course you will. We'll all see them. It's going to be simply wonderful next spring in the barn cellar with 514 baby spiders running around all over the place." "Maybe," said Charlotte quietly. "However, I have a feeling I'm not going to see the results of last night's efforts. But I don't want you to worry about me. This is your big day. Look at my web. Doesn't it show up well with the dew on it?" Charlotte's web never looked more beautiful than it did this morning. At 9 o'clock, Mr. Arable's truck rolled into the fairgrounds and came into a stop at Wilbur's pen. "Look!" cried Fern. "Look at Charlotte's web! Look what it says!" "Humble," said Mr. Zuckerman. "Now isn't that just the word for Wilbur?" Everyone rejoiced to find that the miracle of the web had been repeated. "Ladies and gentlemen," said the loudspeaker in a pompous voice, "on behalf of the governors of the fair, I have the honor of awarding a special prize of $25 to Mr. Zuckerman, in token of our appreciation of the part played by this radiant, this terrific, this humble pig in attracting so many visitors to our great county fair." This was the greatest moment in Mr. Zuckerman's life. It is deeply satisfying to win a prize in front of a lot of people. And at last, things calmed down. Charlotte and Wilbur were alone. "Charlotte," said Wilbur, "why are you so quiet?" "A little tired, perhaps, but I feel peaceful. Your future is assured. You will live secure and safe. Nothing can harm you now." did you do all this for me? He asked. I don't deserve it. I've never done anything for you. You have been my friend, replied Charlotte. That in itself is a tremendous thing. I wove my webs for you because I liked you. After all, what is a life anyway? We're born, we live a little, and then we die. A spider's life can't help being something of a mess with all this trapping and eating flies. By helping you, perhaps I was trying to lift up my life tree. Well, said Wilbur, I'm no good at making speeches. I haven't got your gift for words. But you have saved me, Charlotte, and I would gladly give my life for you. For a moment, Charlotte said nothing. Then she spoke in a voice so low, Wilbur could hardly hear the words. I will not be going back to the barn. Wilbur leapt to his feet. Not going back? Charlotte, what are you talking about? I'm done for, she replied. In a day or two, I'll be dead. Hearing this, Wilbur threw himself down in agony and pain and sorrow. Great sobs racked his body. But suddenly, he had an idea. If Charlotte herself was unable to go home to the barn, at least he must take her children along. He carefully took the little egg sack in his mouth and held it there at the top of his tongue. He remembered what Charlotte had told him, that the egg sack was waterproof and strong. It felt a little funny on his tongue and made him drool a bit, and of course, he couldn't say anything. But as he was being shoved into the crate, he looked up at Charlotte and gave her a wink. She knew he was saying goodbye the only way he could, and she knew her children were safe. Goodbye, she whispered. Then she summoned all her strength and waved one of her front legs at him. She never moved again. Wilbur never forgot Charlotte. Although he loved her children and grandchildren dearly, none of the new spiders ever quite took her place in his heart. She was in a class all by herself. It's not often that someone comes along who is a true friend and a good writer. Charlotte was both.
Okay, folks, please take